In light of everything that's been going on in the United States these past few weeks, from the death of Charlie Kirk to our government seemingly turning on us, I want to share a theory that I've been working on for about a year now. I've been reflecting deeply on the spiritual origins of whiteness. And when I say whiteness, I don't just mean white skin. I mean the spiritual practice of whiteness.
The pattern of thoughts and behaviors that have exploited and brutalized Black and brown people around the world for centuries.
I was inspired by watching Game of Thrones for the first time. The first few episodes were really hard for me to get through because they were so brutal and grim. But I noticed something striking. The methods of brutality that they were employing against each other being other groups of white people, those methods looked eerily familiar. They resembled the brutality I'd seen in movies about slavery and what I'd studied in slave history. At the same time, I also felt an immediate increase in desire to read my Bible and clarity in Bible study. Like, it just fell on me suddenly within those first 3 or 4 episodes. It was like the stories of the Old Testament, they suddenly seemed alive to me in a new way. And I know now that it was to bring me to this moment. After just a few days, maybe a week or so, I came across a story that seemed to speak directly to the origins of whiteness as a practice. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just having Bible study and enjoying that. But God, as always, He moved me in a precise way. And I realized from this story that greed, deception, along with a visible mark of white skin, they were all connected in Scripture. And I was able to see that pattern that would eventually scale up into a system that prioritizes wealth and domination over justice and obedience to God. So let's turn to 2 Kings chapter 5. In this chapter, we see a man named Naaman, the commander of the Syrian army, and he is dealing with leprosy. Now, at this time, the Syrians were oppressing the Israelites, and Naaman and his wife had an Israelite slave girl, basically. In Leviticus, we see that the Israelites had really strict purity laws when it came to leprosy. So I know this young lady was extremely uncomfortable serving in their home. Despite her position in life and her young age, she spoke up to Naaman's wife, telling her about a prophet in Israel that could heal him. The wife tells Naaman, and Naaman tells the king. The king says, "Say less," and sends him off with gold and silver and like 10 outfits of fine clothing to pay for his healing. Naaman goes to Israel, and Elisha, God's prophet, tells him what to do to be healed. He follows the instructions and he receives his healing. Then he goes back to Elisha to give him the gifts, and Elisha refuses them. He's like,
"No, we don't do that here. That's not how any of this works."
And he sends him on his way. But Elisha's servant, Gehazi, sees all of this go down, and inside of him, something stirs up. He sees Naaman's wealth and he covets it. He chases Naaman down, claiming that some prophets suddenly showed up and Elisha needed the gifts to take care of them. And Naaman gives him what he wants, and he even sends his servants back to help him carry it. When they get to the gate, he says, "I'll take it from here," and he goes and he hides the stuff. Once he's done all of that, Elisha comes out and asks him where he went. He's like, "Oh, I haven't been anywhere." And Elisha, being God's prophet, is like, "You know I'm a prophet." And he curses him for what he did. But there are 2 details that I think are extremely important to note in this story. First, when Gehazi decides in his heart that he's going to go lie and stealing the gifts that were meant for Elisha, he makes an oath to God. In verse 20, he says, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will chase after him and get something from him."
I'm leaving here with something.
Now, I looked a little deeper into this and I found out that this was a serious oath. It was kind of like saying, "I swear to God," but it was like a real oath. So he is invoking the name of God to lie and steal. Does that sound familiar? The second thing that we need to pay attention to is what Elisha says before he curses Gehazi. He says in verse 26, "Is this the time to receive money and clothing, olive groves and vineyards, sheep and cattle, male and female servants?" He really blows it out of proportion because as a prophet, he can see that Gehazi's greed goes much further than what we saw him do. Elisha prophesies that not only does Gehazi want money and clothes that don't belong to him, he wants land that doesn't belong to him, crops that don't belong to him, livestock that doesn't belong to him, and male and female slaves. Elisha says in verse 27, "Because you have done this, you and your descendants will suffer from Naaman's leprosy forever." And when Gehazi leaves the room, his skin turns white as snow. So, this is the basis for my theory, the leper's revenge. What began as personal greed has escalated into a system of corruption. Gehazi was permanently marked. His skin turned white as a generational signature of greed, deception, and spiritual corruption. His story is not just a cautionary tale for one man. It is written as a blueprint. It shows how personal sin, left unchecked, can scale into generational and systemic sin. Greed, exploitation, and deception become normalized, and then it's passed down, and eventually it becomes institutionalized. This is the spiritual pattern behind whiteness as a practice. Come back for part 2, where we will be looking at another instance of God cursing someone with white skin. And we're going to dispel the very, very popular myth that dark skin is a curse. I'll see you then.